Hello and welcome to Everyday Oral Surgery. This is your host, Dr. Grant Stucki. I am an oral and maxillofacial surgeon practicing in Denver, Colorado. The goal of this podcast is to connect, learn, and inspire. In this podcast, you'll be hearing from OMS surgeons all over the globe discussing ways to improve the practice of oral and maxillofacial surgery. Most information shared in this podcast will be based on personal experience and opinions, so please supplement what you learn here with approved research studies. Without further ado, please enjoy today's episode. All right, welcome everyone to another episode. Thank you for tuning in. Got a great topic for you today. Today I'm with two guests, Dr. TJ Collins and Daniel Hosler. TJ has been on our podcast before. He's an oral and maxillofacial surgeon practicing in Indiana, and Daniel is the CEO of Allied OMS. Has a ton of experience with private equity. And kind of that's what our topic is today, and helping our listeners just make informed decisions. So maybe Daniel, can you just give us a little bit of background on kind of what you're doing professionally?
Certainly. Yeah, I grew up in a healthcare family, so been spending a lot of time around doctors and dentists and nurses. I'm one of the co-founders and CEOs of Allied OMS. And prior to that, I spent 15 years working in healthcare private equity. So I've been in private equity for the last 20 years and really trying to work with doctors to teach them kind of the inner workings of how private equity works.
Awesome. And TJ, just for our listeners who haven't listened to the episodes with you, just give us a 10-second kind of summary of your background and your current practice setup.
Sure. So I practice in South Bend, Indiana. I have a partner, Dr. Billy Hull, and then we have a third doctor that's with us now as an associate, Dr. Lane Hawes. Dr. Hull and I did our residency together with Dr. Stucki at UIC in Chicago. I finished training in 2014, and I've been in South Bend since then. And then I guess about probably 8 months ago now, we decided to join Allied OMS. So I brought this topic up to discuss on the podcast because it was a very eye-opening process as far as transitioning from a true private practice to joining a larger group.
Yeah, and I appreciate that you reached out. I've had many guests reach out and want to hear, especially from surgeons who have made the process and how they decided to go that route. And I mean, a lot of our older surgeons thinking about selling the practice, a lot of younger surgeons trying to figure out where to go. Maybe we could start more general and talk about just why private equity in general is interested in OMS practices. Maybe Daniel, you could start us off on that one.
Sure. And, I would expand it. It's not just OMS. It's kind of a funny confluence of two things. You've got a number of doctors that approach retirement age, and they look at the value of their practice, and you've got, newer surgeons, newer doctors coming in that have tremendous student loan debt balances.
Right.
And then you look at it and you say, how is somebody going to pay me a fair price for the practice? And in walks private equity. And they say, look, we'll help you sell a portion of your practice. You can have some stock so you can participate in some of the upside. And you get taxed at long-term capital gains tax treatment. Sort of at first blush, it makes a lot of sense. But, we'll talk about it later. There's the devil's in the details. I think one of the things that's particularly attractive in OMS is many of our surgeons are dual degreed. Many of them offer varieties of options in terms of how the procedures occur, whether that's kind of local numbing or IV sedation. And I think that provides a little bit better of a margin profile in the eyes of private equity. And private equity is really smart, right? They do a ton of research. And one of the other things that they've looked at is just the long-term trends. We all chew our food with our teeth. Knock on wood, it doesn't seem like the AI robots are going to take over oral surgery anytime soon. So as long as we consume food with our teeth and we live, past 41 years of age, typically you're going to need the effective hands of our oral and maxillofacial surgeons. So that creates a good environment for private equity to take a deeper dive.
Yep. Anything to add on that one, Dr. Collins?
No, I think Dan kind of hit the nail on the head as far as practice value. Our practice had grown to a level where if we were to bring an associate in and have them buy into our practice, or we got to retirement age and wanted to sell our practice, it would be next to impossible to get the value out of our practice that it's worth. There just aren't people out there that would be able to afford that.
Okay. Yeah, that kind of leads us into that next point of how you decided to make that decision and maybe kind of sharing some of the pearls that you came upon going through this process.
Yeah, so Dr. Hull and I, we really never thought that we would go the route of joining private equity or a larger group. But we also saw the writing on the wall that the industry was heading in that direction. So we felt it was prudent to at least explore it, learn about it, and see what options were out there. So we were actually approached by 2 or 3 groups and listened to their pitch. And we after that, we still were really on the fence and leaning towards just keeping the practice to ourselves. And I decided to just do a Google search and look at all the different options that were out there. And I actually contacted Allied because looking through their website, one of the things that was attractive to me with Allied was that it's a doctor governed group. So their board of directors, I think I can't remember the numbers exactly, but I think there were like 7 oral surgeons on the board and then two business minded people. So I wanted to hear what they had to say, and so we talked more with Allied, and just looking at all the different options, it was just really eye-opening and confusing at the same time as far as how these deals work. So the more we talked about it, we kind of narrowed it down to, one, does this make sense financially? And it became very apparent that it was just as important at our age to find the right partner, if we were going to do it, where we would be, fulfilled and happy practicing for the rest of our careers. Because we've got, I'm 45 now, so a minimum of 10 to 15 more years to practice before I'm done. So the decision for us really came down to more so finding the right partner, and then just doing the math to make sure that it made sense financially for us as well.
And how did you make that decision? I mean, what goes into finding the right partner? Because I'm sure there's a financial side, the compensation, what you're paid for the practice, but then there's the ongoing relationship, and what does that look like on a day-to-day basis when you're practicing? How did you parse through all that?
So the private equity portion, at least for me, was very difficult to understand and get a grasp on. These deals or letters of intent that you receive, they're it's basically written in a different language. So there's you have your payout piece when you decide to partner, and then there's the equity piece as well. The payout part is pretty simple. That just comes down to a number. But the equity piece, and Dan can probably elaborate on this more, every group is different, and there's some groups that have different type of equity shares. Some of them value their equity shares really high to make it look more attractive to you when those shares might not really be worth that much. It's speculation. Um, so for me personally, the decision came down to kind of looking at my long-term financial plan, and I actually took the equity piece out of my decision. I looked at that equity as a bonus, but equity is not guaranteed. There's a lot of speculation that goes into how much that's going to be worth, how many times the recap is going to occur, which increases the value of that equity. So I didn't want to make a financial decision based on that equity. So the financial part for me came down to, okay, what amount of money am I going to get now? What can I expect to continue to make practicing? And what does that look like 20 years from now for me? And then if the equity piece plays out, that was just a bonus for me. But really, for me, the larger decision came in the partnership and feeling comfortable with who I was working with. And that really just came down to a gut feeling for me. We had dinners with many different groups, and when we had dinner with Allied, we had dinner, I think, two doctors and a couple of business development people, and um, it just came down to it felt right. And then just looking at the management structure, um, it allowed us to still pretty much maintain, 100% control of our practice and what we do every day, what we do long term. Um, yeah, it felt like the right fit.
Yeah, maybe to touch on the complicated nature of private equity. I mean, Dr. Collins is spot on. We have a number of tip sheets on our website. We have the 5 questions I wish I would have asked before I partnered with a private equity partner. And again, the goal that I have, right, sort of like our why do we exist, is we just want to throw the curtains wide open on the world of private equity for our doctor partners so that they can ask better questions. Even if Allied's not the right home for your practice, we want to make sure that we equip every one of our doctors with the right questions to ask. Something as simple as, Dr. Collins was hinting at some kind of elements of a little bit more straightforward and conservative nature of how we run the business. Something as straightforward as just asking the question, how much debt did the private equity firm put onto the business in order to make it work? And when you do the research, our private equity partner today, they did the research. You go back 30, 40 years, and it's not just in healthcare private equity deals, it's in a lot of partnerships. When you have too much debt on the books, you can get into trouble. It doesn't matter how great the business is. And so one of the things that we intentionally said was we're going to use less debt than any of our competitors. And I stand on that. I know that's true. To make sure that we've got the flexibility. None of us can guess when a recession hits or when there's a hiccup in the economy. So by being a little bit more conservative from a capital structure perspective, that was sacrosanct to us, right? I mean, we talked to some investors who wanted us to go almost double the amount of debt that we have on our books today, almost double. And it's like, it would be crazy to do that. So, working together with Dr. Collins, I think he hit the nail on the head. Doctors are involved in every step of the process. And I think that's also something that differentiates us. And one of my favorite things is Dr. Collins and his partner run a very well-oiled machine. They're maniacally focused on patient outcomes. They do a great job with their staff. I mean, I think we'll learn a lot from Dr. Collins' practice as well. One of the things that Dr. Collins had mentioned was, hey, with this doctor-led board, is that something I could, maybe sit in on a couple meetings? And we're like, oh my gosh, love that. So literally had Dr. Collins join us for a couple meetings. And actually recently, Dr. Collins, I'll put you on the spot. I heard that a question was asked, what's the formal process for making sure that more doctors can partner on the board of directors? It's a great question. So I'm going to put that up to the board. It sounds like maybe you might have raised your hand to say, like, I'd like to be considered for the next kind of nominating slate. One compliment I'll give, though, we've created a culture at the board level where we've demystified what a board of directors does, because I think it is scary. A private equity-backed board sounds ominous. It's not the cigar smoke-filled room where the drapes are shut and there's somebody carrying a gavel. It's wide open, right? We're talking about lots of different strategic issues. We're trying to forecast years into the future. And what I loved most is when Dr. Collins attended his first meeting, he literally participated right out of the gates and throughout the meeting. And I think that doctor participation is so critical. So for him to come in and feel comfortable, I'd say like everybody said, wow, Dr. Collins had great comments. He jumped right in. It's like he's been on the board for years with us. That to me is a testament for doing it the right way. And it's hard.
What are,
Yeah.
I was going to ask, what are some of the common, pitfalls, quote unquote, the risks, the red flags that you would kind of talk to another provider, who's thinking about selling their practice and joining a group like this? TJ, what would you say?
I, I think for us to when I think of how you should go about looking at private equity groups, I think we did it the right way to where, we weren't sold on the idea of joining somebody. So, you have to find the right fit, as I mentioned before. So I think the common pitfall is, if you go into this process thinking, okay, I'm definitely gonna to join a group, human nature is I'm gonna go and find whoever offers me the highest dollar amount.
Right.
And in our situation, I think we had 3 or 4 different groups that had sent us letters of intent, and we joined Allied, but I can tell you they didn't have the sexiest offer on paper. But what you see on paper, you've got to kind of dig through the details to see what that really means, because as I mentioned before, equity can be overvalued, and then as Dan mentioned, these groups can carry a lot of debt. There can be different equity payout structures, so the that number that they present you um, isn't the number that you're actually going to see in the long run. So long story short, I think the biggest pitfall is looking at just the money side of it, especially when you're a younger surgeon like myself that is planning to practice for a long time. If you don't find the right partner to basically marry for the rest of your career, that can make for a miserable 10 to 15 years. One of my biggest concerns when we started to go through this process was just some of the nightmare stories that you hear about doctors that have joined groups, and the what was put on paper at the beginning doesn't end up being the reality. And you see these groups get into a lot of financial trouble, and then that just trickles down to the providers. And when you have I think when you have these leadership teams that are based of all business-minded people and there's no clinicians, patient care gets lost in the shuffle, and it just becomes a business based on spreadsheets, and the personal aspect of care is lost. So I think looking at the financial part and kind of tearing it apart and understanding what each part means, and then also understanding who you're going to be working with and making sure that you're working with them and not for them.
Like
Well
that.
said.
Anything to add on that, Dan, as far as common risks and red flags that you'd counsel surgeons to take in mind?
Yeah, I think the courtship process, like Dr. Collins mentioned, is so important. So if you have options, right? I think the way that they walked into it was we don't have to do anything. We're a very well positioned practice. We are looking 10 to 15 years down the road and trying to make a good decision now. But taking your time to ask the right questions is so critical. I do it as the leader of the organization, and also kind of when I'm wearing my private equity hat. when we talk to private equity investors, we've been talking to prospective investors since the day we started. We started in the middle of COVID. And the idea is you want to make sure that what people say is backed up by what they actually do. And I'm frequently looking for a gotcha, right? I'll give you an example. Heard one of our competitors mention that their investors said, we think as we grow the business in oral surgery, that these should look like Burger Kings. They should all operate on a very, very tight set of metrics. And I thought to myself, my God, I never want healthcare to be delivered like a Burger King. No offense to Burger King. There's so much regional nuance. Healthcare is such a deeply personal decision. And for oral and maxillofacial surgery, you typically then have the added complexity of pain being involved. So, you can't necessarily always make like the easiest, most rational decision when you're also under duress. So I think it's the same thing for doctors, being able to ask the right questions, make sure that it's the right partnership, and then ultimately feeling it out. And if it feels like it's the right fit for you, I mean, culture is so important. But I say if you can take your time, that's probably the best way to find the right partnership for you.
Yeah, I think, taking your time, from the start of our process till the end, it was 2 years. And we took our time. There were plenty of times that we were put in a position where people were trying to force our hand. But I can tell you that anybody that's going into this process, it's all bark and no bite. As the surgeon, if you have a profitable practice, you are much more valuable to that group than the group is to you, in that courtship process. So, if you run a strong, well-oiled practice, and you're not ready to make that decision, like they'll come back. You can always make that call and they'll still be interested.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. What you're saying is probably a key point here as far as exploring this or thinking about it. And when you're in a position, to have time and you have a productive practice, because I hear a lot of guys get to a point, they're older, practices, they're getting burned out. It's like, I just got to sell. I got to sell or do something because I can't take this anymore. It seems like that would be kind of a recipe to make potentially a bad decision when you're maybe under the gun or you're just kind of want to unload something. And so it sounds like that's probably the right way to do it, is maybe start early, be very well educated, look at several groups. This leads us into what you were mentioning, Dan, as far as question asking. What are the best and kind of most efficient questions that a surgeon should be asking of private equity groups before joining?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think one of the questions that we like to ask our doctor partners is, what are your goals? So, I think you almost want to make sure that your future partner is asking you the question, in potentially partnering with somebody, what do you hope to achieve and in what time frame? And so I like to use that as kind of my framework. So as the practice or as the doctor, what is it that you're hoping to achieve? Is this a retirement plan because you've waited a little bit longer? Or for Dr. Collins and his partner, they looked at this and saw the writing on the wall and said, we want to make sure that we can be active participants and vocal participants. So I like to think about like, what are you trying to achieve over what time frame? Also, ask questions about how do they manage practices? So what do they come in and make a bunch of changes? Do they not change anything, or is it something in between? What are the specific changes that they think that they want to make? Rest assured, when they go through diligence, right, they're going to be putting you through the meat grinder of asking a million questions. It's exhausting and frustrating because it's like, I feel like I've already answered that question. Well, there's a little wrinkle to it, so we got to re-ask it. So being able to understand what might change. And then also, I like to say, let's have the doctors make sure that they can ask questions of other doctors. So, do you have some doctors that I can talk to that look like my practice? I think this is an important thing. Market segmentation is incredibly important. This is the Kellogg MBA in me. Dr. Collins' practice as a 3-doctor practice is very different than a 1-doctor practice under a single roof, is different from a 3-doctor practice under 3 different roofs, right? These are 3 radically different ways of delivering patient care. So one of my suggestions is ask to speak to some doctors that kind of have the look and feel of your practice, because the way in which private equity, well, good private equity in particular, manages those different businesses should be different, so that it's not cookie cutter. I've said I've done over now at this point over 100 partnerships with doctors over the last 20 years. And sometimes doctors say, oh, you've done this a bunch. And I'm like, look, if you've done 100, you've done one. Every single partnership is different because everybody's goals, what they're hoping to achieve, timeframes, what they want to change, what they don't want to change. You have to make sure you ask that question and not presuppose it. So you want to find a partner that's going to make this a very back and forth, question oriented type of engagement. If they're coming in and saying, hey, here's what we're going to do, here's how we like to do it, that could work for some doctors. Maybe if you're towards the tail end of your career and you don't care about those things, that's okay. But you just want to be careful about making sure that it aligns with, really your values as a practitioner.
Got it. What were your top 3 or 4 questions that you were asking the various groups, TJ?
I think the top question for us was, who's going to run our practice? Are we going to run it, or are you going to run it? Are we your employee or your partner? Kind of hitting on what Dan said about like the quote unquote Burger King model. Every practice is very different, and different geographic areas of the country have different needs for their practice. So we didn't want the company to come in and say, okay, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to increase your fees by 50%, because, out in where you are in, Colorado or out in California, it's a heck of a lot easier to justify, charging $500 or $600 to take a tooth out. Well, if you do that in our area, that's not going to work. That's going to put patients out the door and down the street to somebody else. So we wanted to be able to maintain, control or a strong say in, our fee schedule. So that was number one question is like, are you going to come in and change our fee schedule? Because that's the easiest way to increase your revenue and your bottom line is to increase that fee schedule. But if you don't have an understanding, and if the private equity company doesn't have a trust in you that you understand your market and trust that decision, then that can be a practice killer. And I think that's what happens in a lot of these deals is you have these larger companies come in and they put their stamp on the practice with what they do with every other practice, and that's when things don't work. And then I kind of touched on it before, but we asked, who's making the decisions in the company, and we took some time to talk with a lot of those people before we decided to join as well, to understand what their motivations were, and where they saw the company going in the next 10 years. And it's pretty easy over a 5 or 10 minute conversation to get a good grasp on what somebody's motivations are. And I think you'll probably remember from when we were residents, Dr. Maloro, our program chair, he would talk about interviewing potential candidates. He would say, I know within the first 90 seconds whether they're a good fit or not. And we would just kind of all laugh and say, how can you possibly do that? But you can get a pretty good grasp on someone's personality and what their goals are in the first few minutes of a conversation.
I like that. Good questions to ask. What can you share a little bit, Dan, about what the Allied's OMS kind of perspective is on maybe some of those things that Dr. Collins was talking about, fee schedules, making changes, who's running the practice, what is the perspective there?
Certainly. So one of the things that we try to do is we want to have a more systematic approach to help the practice, really continue to thrive in their markets. And so we will look at fee schedules every single year, but we'll baseline it based on what we see in that region. So we do go through, some of our practices haven't updated fee schedules after they've joined Allied. They hadn't updated them in 3 or 4 years. And so the hard part is, right, we have a lot of employees. We want to make sure that we can adequately compensate our employees and provide great benefits to them. But if we don't have the extra revenue coming in, then it's harder to do that. So everything is in balance: patient care, taking great care of the employees, providing autonomy to the doctors. So to that point, we run an analysis. It's regionally focused. It's a competitive analysis. So there are times where it does not make sense to adjust the fee schedule. The market might be very, very efficient. There are other times where you can say, hey, we've got the ability to make this adjustment. And that really helps us continue to provide a great place to have all of the employees work. So that's a very delicate balance. Some of the other topics that he was mentioning, again, I think it goes back to making sure that we've got a tight alignment between the management team and our doctor partners out in the field. The best way to help our practices grow is to use data and analytics coming out of that data, and then presenting it back to the doctors in a way, hopefully, that they haven't historically seen, to say, hey, here's a couple of things you could be thinking about to drive greater efficiencies in your practice. I had an interesting conversation for a doctor who was really busy, worked 5 days a week, but the schedule was just sort of like scattershot. And we said, it's going to sound kind of funny, but I think you could actually take a day off a week and organize your schedule into 4 days. And then, you pay your staff for the 4 days. Maybe they work a little bit harder. Maybe there's a little bit of overtime. But, if you say that this is sufficient for you, I'd rather give you a day off and say you can still do just as well economically, still see the types of patients that you want to see, and just do it in 4 days. And so, sometimes it's interesting insights where it's pattern recognition, right? We've got 57 locations now. And so our ability to look at this point, hundreds and hundreds of columns of the scheduler and parse out some unique findings to say, hey, if you'd like to work 4 days instead of 5 days, or maybe you want to see more patients and you just can't figure out how to do it in 5 days. Again, it's that back and forth approach. Even after folks join us, what does success look like for you? What are your goals? And how can we as the management team serve our doctors? It's literally the first core value at Allied OMS, and that is the management team only exists to serve our doctors so that our doctors can serve their patients, right? It's sort of a very virtuous cycle, because happy doctors tend to create happy patients. Happy patients, lead to, more engagements with doctors, and so on and so forth. So I'm very clear when I talk about, huddle meetings with our management team, or when we go into senior management team leadership meetings. We serve our doctors. We serve at the leisure of our doctors. And if we don't do a good job, then there's going to be, consequences of that. So it's an awesome responsibility to get to partner with doctors the way in which we do.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Any closing thoughts for our listeners? Kind of some takeaways that you'd advise people to. TJ, maybe you could kind of talk to that. Just a lot of younger surgeons, I think, listen to this podcast and are interested in this. How would you counsel them?
I think the most important thing is, if you are considering it, take your time. Don't be pressured into a decision. Look at things objectively and long term. Dan may agree or disagree with me on this, but one of my sticking points during the whole process was the equity portion of your deal. I don't think, as a younger surgeon, especially, like, you can't bank on that portion of the deal. I literally went into the decision saying this equity portion is worth zero. I don't think you can make a a long-term financial decision at, the age of 45 that is saying, okay, well, they're telling me that this equity portion is going to be worth this much, so I'm going to, account for that in my retirement. Um, so I looked at it as, what am I going to get now? What can I, anticipate I'm going to make due to, my production, what I have control over, and does that make sense? And then the partnership part is huge. Just being comfortable with who you're working with. One thing I kind of forgot to touch on was, our practice from the time I joined the practice in 2014 till the time we partnered, our practice had grown as far as like our net collections 330%. We went from, I think, 12 employees when I started, and now we're up to like 37. So a big part of the decision for us was we started to notice that the business side of our practice had gotten to be so large that we were spending so much time with the business part of things and staff management that the clinical part of it became much less fun for us. And that's why we do this is we like to take care of people. We like to do surgery, and the joyful part of that was starting to disappear. So, we were at a point where we said, all right, we're going to either have to hire people like Dan to come and help us manage this practice, or we're going to need to join a larger group where that team is already in place. So, doing it for the right reasons. Just don't look at it as, a financial pitfall. Look at it as, how is this going to serve my practice, serve my patients, serve my employees long term, to make my career as fulfilling as possible.
Nice.
Yeah. I'd echo. I mean, I think the way Dr. Collins looked at it, I think is smart. I don't like going in, and we certainly have to sell against it, saying like, hey, I think my rollover equity is going to be worth zero. But the reality is the equity is going to be worth somewhere between zero and a lot of money. And the real question is, how do you risk reward balance what that looks like? What are the factors that cause it to move to one side of the spectrum or the other? So I love the approach that they took because I think, frankly, it challenged our team to talk through what are the pitfalls, what are the risks that drive down the value of the rollover equity versus what are the things that can drive up the value. And I think our team hopefully did a nice job of trying to provide a balanced view. And especially for a younger surgeon, I think that's right. Getting some equity, though, I think is also super important because if you think about it, when a young surgeon fresh out of training, out of residency or fellowship, joins a practice, right, as those folks start to get really productive, you're really creating value for somebody else. And so one of the things that we really want to teach our young surgeons is how can we help you create some value for yourself, not just the cash compensation that you might get, but real equity value over time. So it's one of the things that we do with all of our new hires. We give them a small grant of stock so they've got some skin in the game. And then once they hit their 3-year anniversary, then there's opportunities to be able to buy additional stock. Maybe it's when doctors retire, they get kind of first options on buying stock from retiring doctors. But it's a really important point that, we really want to make sure that we can try to teach these young doctors how they can really build equity that hopefully will be worth more in the future, so that they can build a little bit of a nest egg that way.
That's awesome. Well, I really appreciate you guys running through some of these details. I think this will be helpful for those who are trying to make this decision, considering it, not sure if they should make a decision like this. And if you're good with it, I could put your guys' contact info in the show notes so listeners could reach out, and continue the discussion on.
Yeah, I'd love it. It's fascinating. Sometimes I get doctors that reach out to me saying, look, I want an extra set of eyes. Like, could you look at this employment agreement or could you look at that? We do that all the time. So I would say if you do have questions, happy to put my contact information in. And whether you want to talk with me or Dr. David Costores, who's one of our co-founders, or Dr. Collins, again, that fact finding and information seeking phase of the process is so important.
That's awesome. Any other comments, TJ?
No, I think we covered things pretty well.
Awesome. Well, we end every podcast with some rapid fire questions. So, first one is, what is the best book you guys have read in the past year? We'll start with Dan. Any
Ooh,
books you've read?
that is a good question. So we do a book club at our board of directors, and we take turns submitting books. So we've read a bunch of books over the years. Um, I'd have to say that I recently reread The Paradox of Choice. And it's a fascinating book. It was written a while back, and it's based on some psychology studies from the 70s and 80s. And the idea, and we've actually given these to our brand new surgeons. The idea is, our reptilian brains really aren't great at making complicated decisions. Many times it's A or B. And so sometimes residents that come right out of training and they enter the practice, they get a referral and it's like it's supposed to be this. And they can say, look, we can do this, or we can do this, or we can do this. And all of a sudden the patient's like, too many choices. So Paradox of Choice is a really fascinating book about keeping decision making simple and actually how impactful that can be to getting somebody to, take the treatment plan that you're looking to do, or to help get something done.
Love that. How about you, TJ? Have you read any books lately?
Yeah, I'll give you two. So from a kind of an enjoyable book to read, Andre Agassi's book Open
Yeah.
was a good read. Um, that book kind of goes through his upbringing and his road to stardom and all the hiccups along the way. And um, I have three boys that are teenagers, and um, it kind of helped me put things into perspective as far as how you should treat your kids. And sports aren't everything. Let them be kids. Um, which from his book, his dad did not allow that. Um, and then the other one was actually from the book club, from one of the board meetings I went to for Allied. It was called Strength to Strength.
Mm.
Um, it's basically kind of focused on high performing individuals and how during your career you're you absorb everything you can as a professional, and it's really easy to lose sight of the rest of your life and having hobbies and keeping things in perspective. And it was actually brought to the club by one of the older surgeons, but I think it was a good read for me because it just talks about developing hobbies and having other interests outside your career, so that when that time does come to retire, that you aren't a lost soul, that you have other things to engage in other than your profession.
Love that. I'm a big tennis player, so Open was one of my favorite books. Um, I mean, just so crazy to think how Agassi still to this day says he hates tennis because his dad tortured him with playing so much. But how
With the
great,
dragon.
yeah, with the Dragon Ball machine and hitting 10,000 balls a day or something crazy like that.
Getting fired at you at like 120 miles an hour out in the desert of Las Vegas.
Oh my gosh. And then all the mind games his dad played with him and his siblings, and telling the siblings that Andre was the chosen one, and like making the other kids feel bad. It's just horrible. It's amazing that guy turned out so well. Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Next question. Usually I ask the question of, what forceps do you use to extract tooth number 14? We'll probably just have TJ answer that one.
I just use a 150 AS.
All right, sounds
And
good.
if it doesn't move, I section it and pop it out with the elevator.
Okay. You never go with Dr. Flick. Our old attending Dr. Flick would always get out the anatomic forceps, the 89 or the 90. Do you remember
Yeah,
that?
I don't even think we have those in our building.
Okay. Sounds good. Next question. What is your favorite movie or TV series you watched in the past year? Dan, do you ever watch shows or are you just too busy talking to all your surgeons?
Oh, it's a good question. I try to get out there and watch some things. Maybe not a TV series, but my son has gotten really into Formula One, and so it's kind of fun on the weekends, right? Especially when it's international. He normally doesn't get up at 7:30 or 8 in the morning, but it's been kind of fun to like get up early in the morning with him on the weekends and kind of watch the tail end of a race. So that's probably my answer on the series side. I don't see many movies. I feel like I am on the road a lot. I've got a 16-year-old and a 14-year-old. We used to go to movies together, but that's become less cool. So I don't have a good movie choice.
Well, did you watch F1? I mean, that kind of goes hand in hand.
Okay, great point. We did watch that. My son and I watched that together. That was a great movie. Excellent. Yes.
Oh yeah, that was fantastic. How about you, TJ? Any good shows you've watched?
Yeah, so that's like one of the few things that my wife and I try to do together in between work and shuffling kids from practices. Always watching a series. Right now, we're watching The Lincoln Lawyer on Netflix.
Yes.
Um, it's a drama. It's entertaining. Um, and then as far as movies go, I haven't watched a lot of new movies. I think movies have kind of fizzled out in their entertainment value, but probably one of my favorite movies of all time is Good Will Hunting.
The classic.
Yeah.
Love it. One I recently rewatched with my kids is The Sandlot. I don't know if you guys ever saw that, but that's a classic movie
Great one. Yeah.
as well.
That is a
Yeah.
good movie.
How about it sounds like you both have kids, so what is a power parenting tip you have for the rest of us who are struggling through this experience called parenting, where there was no residency and no real training involved? Dan, we'll start with you. What's your power parenting tip?
Our parenting tip. I'm a big believer in visualization. So when I was growing up, I used to have like literally 3 to 5 word inspirational taglines that were taped up to my bathroom mirror. And it's funny because my dad made a remark. He's like, I don't know what made you do that, but boy, it seemed like that definitely drove you. So I've started doing the same thing. I've tried to encourage my kids, what are they passionate about? And if they can achieve certain things that require ongoing effort and discipline and hard work, then there can be rewards associated with that. And if not, then there are not rewards. And if one kid achieves it and the other doesn't, then uh, the other kid may not get to participate. So there's a picture. So literally on our front and back door of our house, there is a picture of a beautiful new grill. I have an old grill. I love smoking meats. This is the Texan in me. I love smoking meats and grilling and just the whole process of that. So there's a picture of a grill. It's overpriced. It's a total luxury item, but something to aspire to. There's a picture of a French cafe, and there's a picture of a uh, what is it? An NVIDIA 5090 GPU. My son wants to upgrade his graphics card, and I said, "Look, I'll buy you any graphics cards you want, but you got to clock in straight A's by the end of the year." And he just started high school, so a little bit of a transition. My daughter's never been to Paris, and I'm like, look, you lock in. I will take you to Paris, just you and I. We'll go out there and we'll explore the city. Been blessed to have been to Paris a handful of times. One of my favorite cities. I don't speak a lick of French, but I just love getting lost in the city. So the power of visualization in terms of achieving big goals, and even with Allied, when we started it, we had a really big goal. We wanted to try to attract 50 practices in under 5 years. And so it was printed on my office wall. So every day that I was in my home office, I'm on my computer, I look up, there it is, 50 in under 5 years. So I'm a big believer in that constant visualization process.
I love that. How about you, TJ? What's your tip for the day?
Um, Yeah, so I have a junior in high school, so he's 16. Um, so that's the point of parenting that I'm trying to learn about right now is managing a teenager. Um, so what's really big for me now is just developing uh like life discipline for him.
Hmm.
Um, so simple things like, when your alarm clock goes off in the morning, actually get out of bed and don't hit the snooze button. And he does really well in school, but just some of these kind of life skills, to focus on those. Um, and then, I always have to remind myself that, my kids are kids and to let them be kids. So it's kind of to make sure that you develop that balance between, helping them grow and mold into a successful adult, but also not making them grow up too quickly. So
Sure.
I remind myself of that every day as a parent that, he is only 16 years old, but he's old enough now that we need to develop some discipline. And like Dan said, I'm really big on rewards and consequences. So um, I don't have big consequences for like one or two bad grades on a test. But there are big consequences for not getting out of bed on time because that's a life skill. So,
Yeah.
you know, just we've been working on that getting out of bed part for a while now. And I set a rule for him, like, if you don't leave this house, you're not pulling out of the driveway by 7:40 to go to school, then you're going to lose your cell phone for a week. And he, um, he kept the cell phone for a good 3 or 4 months, and then last week he
Mhm.
overslept and he lost the phone for a week, which is devastating for a 16
Oh
year
yeah.
old.
Sure.
So he just got it back yesterday, so we'll see if that if that was effective or not.
Oh man, the joys of parenting.
Yeah. What's
Uh,
yours?
Well, I don't know if you remember this, but I'm kind of a less is more guy, and in residency, they always have it's like a hierarchy, and so the senior guy has to teach the junior guy, and the bosses, the attendings are always getting on my case saying you need to teach them this, and you need to talk more to these younger guys, and I'm just like, why? Like, they can just see what I'm doing and just do what I do. It's not that hard. And so I've really had to force myself to communicate more as a parent. For example, my kids, I have two drivers now, and one of them pulled into the driveway and with the truck, Tacoma, and there's a horrible screeching noise. And I was like, what? My daughter got out of the truck. I'm like, what is that noise? And she's like, oh yeah, that's been going on for like 4 or 5 months now. And yeah, and every time I brake, the whole car shakes, and I'm very scared to drive this car. I'm like, this started 4 months ago. Oh my goodness. So of course I take the truck into the repair place, and everything that is associated with the brakes is completely disintegrated. The boots, the rotors, whatever there is, the axles, everything's gone. And so I had to take both of my drivers, my kids in, and we, into the repair place. And then I had listen to what this guy is saying about the car, and listen to how much this is going to cost me to repair this. And, how could we have avoided this? We're talking to this guy, Brian, who's the tech. And so the stuff like that doesn't come second nature. I have to like force myself to involve my kids in the communication, because if not, they'll just miss it, right? And it's the easy thing is just for me to take it in, get it, repair it, pay for it, and never tell them a single thing. But bringing them into the shop, having them talk, okay, what do we do next time? How do we fix this? They need that communication, which is not super intuitive to me. I have to force myself to talk sometimes. Have you guys ever had that experience? I don't know. You guys are probably good talkers.
Every day.
It is. it's a great point though. There's so many things that you take for granted that you just get taken care of in your real life. And it's the same thing. I remember when my kids, we would go to Starbucks when they were younger. And I started realizing, like, wait a second, like they need to learn how to talk to adults. And so when they were like 10 and 11, I gave them my phone. I'm like, here, you can use this to pay, but like, here's what I want. Go order. And so it was just so funny, like watching my son, like, stare at his shoes and like make eye contact, right? When you're talking to somebody, you make eye contact. But it's interesting because I think it's those little lessons that become really big impacts later on in life. So, Dr. Stuckey, love that example. Like just get them involved in more of like the real life decisions that they're going to have to make when they're older.
Yes, 100%. Well, good. I really appreciate both of you taking the time this morning to run through this stuff and share some information. I think this will be super helpful for our listeners. And thank you for being on standby for further questions they have. So yeah, appreciate all you're doing, and let's keep the conversation going.
Thanks for doing this. I love that doctors are taking charge. This is probably my third or fourth doctor-led podcast, and I love that y'all are out there trying to get the word out. So thanks for the hard work putting this out.
No problem at all. Thank you, guys. Let's keep in touch.
Yeah, Grant, thanks a lot.
Awesome.
Have a good
Talk
rest
to you
of
later.
your day. Okay. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Everyday Oral Surgery. For more information on these podcasts, please visit everydayoralsurgery.com. I love feedback and would be very grateful if you would reach out to me via my email, grantstucki@gmail.com, and let me know what you thought of this episode. Or you can text me at 720-441-6059. Additionally, if you have any topics you'd like to hear about, or if you would like to be a guest on the podcast, please email or text me. I found many of my interviewees through people who have been contacting me and have been listening, and I've gotten so many great ideas for more podcasts, and that's what helps keep the podcast rolling. So I really appreciate you making that extra effort and helping me out with feedback and knowing what to do next on the podcast. Thank you so much.